Hello, everybody. Joe the Lawyer here with a special request. Please like and subscribe because I have a contest going with Eric Tankar. All right. Whoever gets the 5,000 subs first, the guy has to buy the other guy a beautiful steak dinner with all the fixings and, of course, some high-end drinks, and also donate $100 to the other person's favorite charity. So I want to beat his ass. It's a friendly competition. So please click the like, subscribe button, comment, share it around, and help grow the channel. Totally appreciate it, guys. Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. This is Joe the Lawyer here, and welcome to another edition of Analog Man Cave. Thank you so much for listening and taking the time, guys. I appreciate it. And please, if you like this, click the like button and subscribe. I really appreciate that. It helps with the algorithm and for me to beat Eric in their first run to get to 5,000. So I've been meaning to do this video for a while. It's a big one. Some of my videos, I generally take a few notes and then I just go off the cuff, But this one is one that I've been talking about in bits and pieces on various shows and live streams and broadcasts and other videos for a long time. And people laugh at it because it's like, well, where the works take a crap. That matters. And they're like, well, who gives a shit, man? Just play the fucking game, But no, it does matter to me. It does make a difference, I think, because, and I'm going to sort of dive into it here. And this one, I needed to actually sit down, really hash out my thoughts, write down some notes. I never script anything. I just kind of go off the cuff with a few notes, but this one I really did a little bit of research and took some more notes down than usual. So I want to dive in here. What I'm going to do is first just, lay out the problems I see and then dive into the reasons why it is a problem, right? And so I guess the first thing, where do works take a crap? That is not literal. Well, it could be, but it's not literal in what I'm really trying to get at here. What it really matters to me is that things have to make sense. Within the game world, within the structure of the world, the campaign, the setting, the rooms, the dungeons, and all this stuff, it has to make sense. This goes back to the big word, verisimilitude. And that's really defined as like the appearance of something being true or real. And not realism, not it doesn't have to, because it's a fantasy world, it can't be real, right? It just, as long as it has the appearance of truth within the, confines, the structures of the game, the world you're playing, right? And I'm going to start with an article by the master himself, Gary Gygax. He wrote something in the Sorcerer's Scroll back in July 78, Dragon Magazine number 16. I'm going to just read some snippets from that for you, okay? He was talking about how, D&D is a game first and foremost, and you don't start messing with the game. As soon as you start pulling on various strings, you unbalance the game and blah, 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 and, play it as is. Then he gets into people writing letters talking about, variants and different ways to change it around. And he says, interestingly, most of the variant systems which purport to improve the game are presented under the banner of realism. I have personally come to suspect that this banner is the refuge of scoundrels. So Gygaxian. Whether the last or first refuge is immaterial. Realism has become a bugaboo, another Gygaxian word, in the hobby, and all too many of the publishers, TSR included, make offerings to this god too frequently. Jumps down a little bit and says, when fantasy games are criticized for being unrealistic, and by fantasy I certainly mean both imaginary science fiction games and heroic fantasy, the sheer magnitude of the misconception absolutely astounds me! Exclamation point. How can the critic presume that his or her imagined projection of non-existent world or conjectured future history is any more real than another's? And then a little later on he says, in a pure fantasy game, one based on mythos, and its own unique make-believe, realism, as a reflection of the actual, and logic, cannot be defined in terms conventional to other game forms. Realism in such a game can only be judged by the participants' acceptance of the fantasy milieu, definitely a Gygaxian word, invoked by the game. If this make-believe world is widely and readily accepted, if players fully agree to suspend their disbelief when playing it, the game has reality for them. I agree with that. Involvement and enjoyment indicate acceptance of a game reality, and the game becomes realistic thereby. Game logic in such a fantasy can only follow the basic tenets of the game, logical or illogical. If the basic precepts of the fantasy follow imprimis, it has its own logic. Just as fantasy must be accepted to achieve game reality, so must the underlying principles of the game system be understood to follow its logic. Jesus, Gary, Getting deep there, man. Uh, but you get the point. He's basically saying, as long as you're all in the green on the rules and it's immersive, you're good to go. That's all the reality you need. And he says D&D exists as a game because thousands of people enjoy playing it, and its rules were specifically designed to make it fun and enjoyable. And a consensus of opinion is that D&D is so. Does it need to have a logical justification of any or all of its rules? Because logic does not necessarily create an enjoyable game form. The reply must be generally negative. All right. Then a little further, he says he talks about action and judgment and all that stuff. And he this is actually an important point that I'm going to get to now that I'll flip back to later, but I want to read it to you now. He talks about players desiring action, but pretty much says the odd few will readily tell you that the endless die rolling to determine where a hit lands, having to specify what sort of attack is being made, how the character will defend against the attack, and so on are the opposite of action. They are tedious. Yes, they are. They are. And then he talks about rules like critical hits and, nat 20s doing double damage and whatnot. He's really against that, which I kind of never knew that before until I was reading this article. And he says basically in the latter, when you have massive damage because of a crit hit, it causes instant death. And he says instant death no longer allows participants to use judgment when playing. Remember that. Instant death no longer allows participants to use judgment when playing. Certainly some monsters are capable of delivering death at a single stroke, but players know these monsters and can take precautions. If everything that is faced has an excellent chance to kill characters, they will surely die before long. Then the game loses its continuity and appeal, for lasting character identification cannot be developed. Yeah, in other words, the longer the characters live, the more you identify with them, right? So that is Gygax's take on all of this. Now, here's the thing. I like things to make sense within the game, all right? As I've said, with the work taking a crap, what are they, there's an ecology factor involved. Let me talk about stuff that doesn't make sense. Maybe it'll help you understand where I'm coming from, to look at the things that don't make sense to me and where it breaks verisimilitude, okay? Look up at the ecology of a dungeon, right? Like funhouse dungeons. All right. Now, if you have a funhouse dungeon, there's the old-fashioned just random rooms and random encounters in the rooms where you go into one room and it's a dragon, and the next room is an orc, and the next room is a blue devil. And it's like you might as well just play the old dungeon board game if you're doing that, right? You're moving through a maze, you open the door, you pull the card out to see what's in that room, and then you start rolling dice to see if you beat the thing in that room. And if you do, you pull a treasure card out and you get that treasure that the thing was holding, right? And then eventually you level up and eventually you win the game. That's all a funhouse dungeon essentially is, except the DM is sort of narrating pulling of the cards and the pulling of the monsters and rolling the monsters' attacks and shit. That's all a funhouse dungeon is. But think about this. Now, this is where we get into why it doesn't make sense. What the hell is the ecology of that dungeon? Like, where does the food supply? Where does it come from? How do certain monsters get past other monsters in order to hunt for food? What's the water supply, right? Look at the map of the Temple of Elemental Evil. Just tell me how that map makes any sense whatsoever based on where all the various monsters are. Like, there's no food supply. There's no water. There's no, unless they're eating each other, in which case it's like, the people stuck on the mountain after a plane crash all eating each other until one survives, having eaten every single relative or friend that existed, right? Like another trope of dungeons, especially funhouse dungeons, I do not agree with is wandering monsters, right? You could have them, but only in very specific areas for specific purposes, all right? Especially if the dungeon is being populated by, creatures with intelligence, for example, because if you think about it, why wouldn't one, if you have a dungeon like the Temple of Elemental Evil, and you had goblins over here and gnolls over there and orcs over here and priests of whatever various elemental gods trying to live a life and get things done, that every time you go to walk down the hallway to visit a friend, you get jumped by a freaking zombie. Where the hell did he come from? Why haven't the zombies been killed off? Just for self-preservation purposes alone. Plus, in a hallway with closed doors, where do they come from? What, are they just to pop out of nowhere and just appear? I look at this for the same reason, the same way in terms of the wilderness, right? it's wilderness to me is the same thing as a dungeon, but there's no walls and no ceiling. There's just barriers, whether it be, uh, rocks or streams or rivers or mountains or whatever the hell, right? They're just barriers. And you got orcs over here and goblins over there, right? Now, okay, you got orcs and goblins in the same forest. Are they allies? Are they at war? Right? What about the wyvern, the dragon, and the griffins that you just rolled up as random encounters while they're traveling through this forest? How the hell do they fit into the picture? Who hunts who? Right? So without that having any sort of logic to it, and if it doesn't make any sense, you can't as a player understand what the hell is going on. Like, look at economics, even, right? So even like the most intelligent humanoids, right, orcs or bugbears or whatever, they have a current. You loot them after you kill them because they might have stuff on them, and they got gems or coins or whatever, right? So they have currency. That means they recognize the value of coins for trade purposes, not just for look at the nice shiny. Otherwise, they'd have a bunch of coins and a bunch of shiny rocks, right? And when some dumb creatures do have something like that, but they put it in their belt pouch and they have coins. They know that it's something to be used in commerce, right? So that means that there's some sort of trade system with the orcs, some sort of trade system with the goblins in that forest, right? So the coin doesn't just exist for PCs to loot. So that means, I have to determine what the economy of that local forest is like. Who buys from who sells to who? All that stuff should factor in, right? It's also why I don't like random encounter tables, except for like ones that I make up myself specifically for the region the PCs are in. Just because orcs might be in a terrain based on what the DMGs or the Monster Manual says, doesn't mean they should be there necessarily, because other stuff might be in a terrain that precludes the existence of orcs, right? You're not going to have an orc city, an orc village of a couple hundred orcs if you got a green dragon, big ass green dragon living nearby. They would not stay, because all they would be is food, convenient hunting grounds for the green dragon. So why would you have a band of 10 orcs in there? And then you get into something like that, you're just grasping for straws and explanations. And as a player, you're like, this doesn't make any freaking sense at all. The funhouse style of dungeons and the funhouse wilderness encounters, they just don't work for me either. Like nothing like that. Like in terms of like some crazy mage, lich, or god put them there and it just repopulates, and that's why. Unless that's the kind of game that you like to run and the kind of game that your players like to play. If you're just putting out a product that's like that for the general population, I think it's just a lame ass excuse for like shit writing and lack of creativity. But if you like that and that's what you want, that's what your players want, and if there's an audience, you think there's an audience for that out there that's going to buy that shit from you, feel free to put it out there, man. But it doesn't. I can't see a modern audience. God, I just quoted the Critical Drinker there with a modern audience. I can't see a modern role playing audience of mature adults actually getting into something like that. Yeah, you're 12 years old, you're 15 years old, whatever. That's a whole different story. But just think about this in terms of this funhouse dungeon, right? Look at the old Gygax's old Castle of Greyhawk stuff, and you see these maps. How much would it cost to make that goddamn thing, right? What kind of crazy ass architect designed it? How much would it cost to make it? It ain't cheap, right? Who would do that? Who would spend all the money and resources on that and then defend it with a freaking pit trap? I know people can say, "Oh, it's magic. Magic did it." Well, bullshit, right? Because even though you guys know that I like lower magic games, look back, even AD&D first and second edition, which had the most magic of the old school games, high level, powerful magic systems did not have magic as powerful to be able to create all these funhouse dungeons across the world, right? And there's the other thing is, it came from the ancient past. Magic was way more prevalent back then and way more powerful. But you know what? My answer to that is you wouldn't design all that bullshit and put all that money and time and investment into it and magic into it and just defend it with pit traps, 10-foot drops onto a spike. There'd be traps like unless you open this door with the proper password, my 9th level spell of doom kicks in and vaporizes your ass into a pink mist. That's what would be defending this, not a freaking pit trap, right? Look back at way back in the day. You guys have probably heard me talk about this. My old 2000 coppers post on my blog. Greg Nardia put out the Greg Nardia blog guy. I forget his name. James Malazewski put out a dungeon that Eric Tenkar ran us through late one Saturday night of over a decade ago. And one room had 2,000 copper pieces just sitting there, and after you killed the giant rats. And my point is, where the fuck, where, huh? Why? Where did it come from? This is probably my first blast out there in the universe about verisimilitude and things having to make sense. It was just ridiculous. Why is it there? Where did this 2,000 coppers come from? Nice stacked all neatly. Exactly. 2,000 coppers, not a penny more, not a penny less, right? It doesn't make any sense. And so we ranted and raved about that for a while, and then caused all kinds of bullshit in the OSR, early OSR back in the day. And, it is what it is. I mean, speaking of that dungeon, it was later, it was put out by Alexander Macris's company back then. And I remember I corresponded with him on some board or blog somewhere after he made some changes to it. And it did make a little bit more sense of the final finished product that they actually put out. And I remember saying, good job and this and that. And I asked him back then if he could, put little dungeon graffiti. My Flail Snail's character back in the day was named Sir the Fist of Uther. And I asked him to put Sir the Fist of Uther was here on the wall of that room. And that is actually in the module. So if you have Dwemer Mount, that's what it was. Get the published copy and just do a search for 2,000 coppers, rats, or Uther, and you'll see that was my little graffiti add to it, But anyway, Alexander Macris has a book called Arbiter of Worlds, which is really fantastic. As a DM guide, this little book, 130, 140 pages, is all you'll ever need. I think it's the best DM guide I've ever seen. But he has a chapter in here talking about, what I consider the most common response to all of my complaints, right? And he calls it abduction. Not alien abduction or anything like that, but he calls abduction, defined by Wikipedia, as the process of arriving at an explanatory hypothesis of a surprising circumstance. And he has an example in here by Charles Sanders Peirce summarizing, and he says, "The surprising fact, C, is observed. But if A were true, C would be a matter of course. Hence, there is a reason to suspect that A is true." And then he gets into what he did in a game, just to make this sort of more clear. He was running a game, and he dropped a random encounter in there, and there was Ettins, but it was like a sci-fi fantasy game on an alien world or something like that. And so he had to come up with an explanation as to why the hell is there an Ettin there, in a prison or whatever it was. And so he had to come up with something like, well, if there was a mysterious gate through space-time that swept up creatures from the Oran Empire and deposited them on the alien world, the presence of an Ettin would be a matter of course. Therefore, his conclusion was there was reason to suspect that a mysterious gate through space-time exists on our alien world. Now, that would suck for me. I would hate that, because how the hell am I as a player going to be able to even understand that, or think about that, or come up with it, or, It's a double-edged sword using this abduction approach, because you're using logic and reason as a DM to come up with some level of explanation. But if it's not grounded in a reality in some way, at least the reality that has been sort of understood to be the reality of the world by the players so far, and if it's not something that they can then guess at, then what good is it even having a reason? You could always make up some bullshit reason as to why something exists. And we're all DMs, we're all creative enough people to be able to come up with anything. We can pull some crap out of our butt, right? It doesn't make a difference. But why does it exist? Why is it there? You could pull some random strained logic out of your ass that the players could never have had a chance of guessing, right? Or you could just think about it ahead of time and put something in there that the players do have a chance to guess at. Now, back to Gygax, and this goes back to the judgment thing. Now, when he talked about being able to exercise judgment as a player, all right, that's what he meant. You need to have certain ideas of exercising your judgment as a player. And that's really the main thrust of why I don't like dungeons where you can't figure out where orcs take a crap, dungeons that make no sense, wilderness encounters that make no sense, worlds, economies that make no sense, because you cannot exercise your judgment. Then just bring it down to the micro level. If the dungeon or the game itself, whatever you're doing, makes absolutely no sense, then you might as well just kick in the door, kill the random monster, take his shit, lather, rinse, repeat. That's all it is. Because think about it, when you're playing a game, you want to be smart about the actions your PC is taking. You want to make sure that your PC is taking choices that make sense and it's going to help them either win or survive, right? And so in a typical situation, the DM describes, here's the situation, here's the environment, right? The players describe what they want to do, and the DM rolls some dice maybe and narrates the results of the actions. But how can the players describe what they want to do if the environment is not understandable, if it makes no sense, if it has no logical coherence, right? Without any sort of framework in the player's head as to how things operate, how can he possibly make an intelligent decision? Why bother trying to figure it out? The game then just evolves into a series of one-shots under the guise of a campaign, which is most likely just a freaking railroad. But the DM running people through crap, like a story he always wanted to write but couldn't because he lacked the talent or the dedication. He's just having his players act it out and just, set piece after set piece after set, like the 4th edition modules. Remember that crap? It was terrible. So I mean, taking it back to the orcs. If I knew as a player that orcs always go somewhere to take a shit, meaning that they don't shit where they sleep, they don't shit where they eat, they don't shit in the cave they're living in, that means if they're leaving this place or they're going down a corridor or something like that to actually take drop a deuce, then you could set an ambush there. You could capture the orc. You could question him about the layout, is the defenses, other people in there, right? Torture him to death, right? And that's just one thing, but that logic of that you can extrapolate into every scenario you could possibly think of. If I want to figure out how things work in the world, so I can predict what's going to happen on a macro level, I also want to be able to predict on a micro level what results my actions are going to have. I like the tactical and the strategic thinking of everything. That to me is it's the most fun, and that's where I get the immersion I out of an RPG. I know not a lot of people like this, as maybe as a deep of a level as immersion as I do, and I use little tricks and things during my game as a player to get that level. Like I like to keep track of food and weapons and how many arrows are left and that sort of thing. It matters to me because it makes me feel like I'm there, like it's gritty, like I'm in it. I know there's got to be a balance because I'm a little pushy with the immersion factor and this sort of thing as a player. I like it has to make sense to me, but there needs to be a balance. I know my brother and I played MERPS, Middle Earth role playing, and it's based on I think the Role Master system. Jesus Christ, that system was so ponderous with combat, it was like virtually unplayable. Only our teenage brains could have understood it and comprehended it and kept it rolling like we did. And only our lack of experience with other games kept us playing it just because it was Middle Earth, because it was just shit, right? So, but again, this is just as a player. You need to be able to make sound judgments based on your experience in the world as to how things work in order to, be able to make decisions that are smart, that are going to keep you alive and get you the most stuff, right? That's really what it comes down to. If none of it makes any sense, then why bother thinking about it, right? That's why it matters when you take a crap. Now, that's just for the player's perspective. As a DM, it matters just as much to me, if not more so. Like in my campaigns, I pick and choose what races and classes and spells I will allow in that campaign. Just because it's in the book doesn't mean you're going to get to use it, right? Why? Because I have an idea, a really good idea, actually, of how my entire world operates. I have a bunch of videos on this talking about how I set up my 2nd edition campaign and what went into it. And I figured out the economics, the social interactions, the political interactions, cultures, and how they all mesh up together in a big web, right? So you pull on one web within that mass of cultures and races out there, and you're going to affect everything else in the web, right? So you can't just drop some random ass race or some random ass class into my campaign just because it's in the player's handbook or some supplement of a month thing. If it doesn't make sense in my world, in my game, you're just not going to be in my game at all. And why is that? Because again, I'm trying to make the setting come alive for my players, and they have the opportunity to know the rules of how everything works there. That way, if they want to discover it, there is an underlying system. There are reasons. And if they want to try hard enough, they can actually figure it out. And they'll do that through experience or NPC interactions, through, just everything that they do. And then they can make an impact on the world in an intelligent, meaningful way, not just through, killing the big monster of the week that threatened a town or the village or whatever the hell. All right, got a real meaningful impact. They can get into every single level of the game. social interactions, economics, war, peace, everything. You name it, they could get into it, and they have, and they've enjoyed it. Now this is the game I run. You guys, everybody plays and runs the game that they want to, and you have to have a good fit and a good mesh of players and DM. But it tends to be that for me, these are the people I like to play with, and these are the folks who like to play with me, sort of, get into this to various degrees. There are people who get way more into it than I do, and people who are less into it. But there needs to be at least some level of acceptance and agreement that you're gonna try. Right, you're gonna give it a shot. You're not gonna make all the time that I put into this a waste of my time. I'm just not gonna play with those people. It just doesn't make any sense to me. I'm not. It's like throwing what is it? Something in front of pearls before swine. Right? That's to quote the Bible. That's pretty much where I'm coming from, guys. So this is why it matters where orcs take a shit. So thank you for listening this long, and please hit the subscribe button and the like button. I got more videos to come. I'm on a roll here lately, in case you haven't seen. So I'm enjoying it, and I'm looking forward to getting into a lot more stuff with you guys. So thank you again very, very much. I appreciate it. Have a great day.